I was going to stop by the store and grab some Spindrift on the way in so I could replace Mauricio's official role as worst drinker.
Oh, yeah, how brutal was that? Shows up with a spindrift, doesn't even know what it was.
If you want to replace Mauricio, just grab a handful of peanuts and eat it while we're all trying to talk.
you got to do it as loud as possible so the whole audience can hear. And then you also have to criticize my top 10 and act super grumpy at the end, like, oh, you just want to get out of here.
Welcome to Drunk Real Estate. Grab a drink and enjoy the show.
Hey there, and welcome to episode 26 of Drunk Real Estate. I am Kyle Wilson, Ashley Wilson's husband, and this week, Mauricio has left us. So we had to reach out to the bullpen, try and get a replacement. And I thought, what better place to look than at the top of the fantasy football leaderboard with me than Sussy Nussy himself, Mike Nuss. How's it going, buddy?
I think I've been the highest scorer for like 5 out of the past 7 weeks. So I'm riding high, ready for the playoffs, except for the week I lost to you, which doesn't really matter. I'm going great. Thank you.
You know, Mike was one of the OG Drunk Real Estate guests before it was Drunk Real Estate, back when it was the podcast Kyle and I used to do. The second time we did this segment, Mike, you were a guest.
Yeah, that was a good story, actually. We were randomly at the Orlando Bigger Pockets at the bar. We were just having a few drinks, and we're like, "Hey, do you want to go up and record an episode of Drunk Real Estate?" This is kind of like the bringing it back to our roots here. What are you drinking over there?
Well, in honor of my favorite podcast, I finished my favorite bottle of whiskey, and unfortunately, AJ took so long, it's already empty. So, started with Blanton's. I got a little backup of the Balvenie as well. So,
well, don't throw away that top of that Blanton's. What letter you got?
I got letter B. My horse has a B on it.
I already have the B.
It's my first bottle of Blanton's too, so it's a big deal.
Oh,
wait a second. There are letters in the bottle. What do the letters signify?
So at the top, the part of like the stopper on the top of the bottle, it either comes at BLANTO and then N again. And so if you get all of the letters, then you can send it into Blanton's and they'll send you back like a little plaque with all the letters on them. It's a nice little marketing ploy for you to keep spending $100 on bourbon.
It's like the golden ticket from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Do you get to go to the factory? And
it's a huge deal around us. Like to get Blanton's is tough in itself, but if you want like a specific letter, like you have to sign up for like a raffle, and it's a whole thing. So good on you, Mike, for bringing a good bourbon. Jay, what are you drinking this week?
Hey, nice to see you too. I am drinking. I decided to go with the bourbon also. I decided to expand my horizons a little bit. I was in Total Wine a couple weeks ago, and I texted Kyle and I said, if I wanted to put on my big boy pants and buy some bourbon, what should I buy? And so he recommended a Knob Creek smoked maple bourbon, so a little bit of sugar and sweetness in there. So get me started like on the path. And so I'm drinking the Knob Creek smoked maple bourbon.
Bourbon with a little bit of training wheels there, just to get you hooked. The first taste is free. Yeah, perfect. And then finally we got AJ, who stuck in LA traffic, rushed to get here, doing the podcast on his phone. That's a little bit of commitment, though. I appreciate you making out. How's it going, buddy?
Going good. I don't even have anything to drink. I'm just lucky that they have internet here in LA or reception. Apparently that's not thing. It's traffic doesn't move, internet doesn't flow, and reception's non-existent. So
yeah, LA is known for not having internet or anything to drink.
Worst, the absolute worst.
When you first showed up, it sounded like you were in the middle of a bar and a party, so you should be able to just flag someone down and get you a drink sent over.
I'm waiting for them.
Awesome. Well, we're a little bit behind, so let's get things going here. Actually, no, we got to talk about what I'm drinking. Right? Thanks for asking, guys. So partnership with our little clear rum company that Jay and I invest in. They partner with this company called Crosswater, and so they make a bourbon. So I thought I'd give it a try. Support my peeps. Do a little Crosswater bourbon. So this will be a new experience for me. I don't usually like going out on a limb, but I'm doing it for you guys. All right, shall we get started?
Let's do it.
Okay, we mentioned last episode, but we literally just found out at that moment that Charlie Munger had unfortunately passed away at the age of 99. We didn't have time because we just found it out, but we felt like we needed to give him a proper tribute since he'd all made a significant impact on our lives and our investing lives. So, Jay, why don't you start us off?
I feel like I'm supposed to be giving a eulogy here, but instead, I just want to talk a little bit about. So Charlie Munger, I'm a big fan. For those that don't know who he was Warren Buffett's partner over at Berkshire Hathaway since the 1970s. Unfortunately, I think he gets a bad rap. Too many people refer to him just as kind of Warren's partner, but the reality was he was vice chairman of the company. I mean, he had as much to do with Berkshire Hathaway as Warren did. He ran a successful investing firm for 15 years before Berkshire Hathaway. He's been on boards of several huge companies, and he actually started out as a real estate attorney and real estate developer. Like back in the 60s. I graduated from Harvard Law, became an attorney, did some real estate law, did some development. So anyway, man after my
He
own
didn't start
heart.
working with Warren Buffett till he was like in his 50s, right? So like it was like halfway through his life before he even met him.
Yeah, it was in the mid 70s. And so he was basically my age. So I guess it's not too late for me to actually make something of myself if I can find a good partner. That's the hard part, finding the good partner, Kyle.
You already did, Jay. I'm gonna be the next Warren Buffett.
I hope so.
I thought you were going to say Ashley was the partner, but if you want to take credit.
Ashley's the good partner, and then there's Kyle.
Well, Charlie Munger is also known for credited for growing Buffett's business and growing the amount of assets that he had to invest, bringing his cost of capital basically down to zero. So I'm just waiting for Jay to do that, and then I'll be the best investor.
So I want to throw out, and we can do one at a time if you want. You guys can throw some out. I want to throw out some investing philosophies that Charlie Munger kind of established, and some of them are pretty interesting and worth discussion. So the first big one, and this is kind of contrary to what a lot of people believe, but Munger was really against diversification. He actually used to refer to it as diversification. And basically his thought there was that when you diversify, one, it's too hard to do because how much do you diversify? Do you buy 5 different stocks or 50 stocks or 500 stocks? And it's basically, if you think diversification is smart, why would you ever stop diversifying? So that was his first argument. But his big one was simply that diversification is a great way to reduce your risk on the downside, but at the same time, it reduces your upside potential. It basically locks you into mediocre returns. And so he was very much against diversification. He was a big fan of just making some big bets and only betting on the things that you really know well. And I know that's kind of contrary to what a lot of investors would recommend, including the guy that Charlie Munger kind of studied under, Paul Graham. Who was a huge diversification guy. So thoughts there. What do you guys think? Diversification?
I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And that really came out when the whole ETF movement came along, where people could basically diversify through ETFs, and it was becoming easier and easier for people to do that. And I agree with them if that's like, you don't need to diversify if that's what you do. Like if you're in the business of picking stocks and investing and things like that, like you shouldn't be diversifying. You should be doubling down on your cost benefit analysis, so your risk analysis, and picking good ones that you want to run with. But if you're just an everyday investor and you don't really know what you're doing, then I think that's what the diversification, that's what they're for.
Fair enough. Okay, nobody has anything else to say about that? Fine, let's move on to the next one.
No, wait. The one thing I always say when it comes to real estate about me and investing is, and I quote Warren Buffett, which sounds like it actually comes from Charlie, which is put all your eggs in one basket and know that basket really, 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 really well. That's my investment philosophy.
Yeah, I kind of follow along with that, considering 99% of everything I do is in storage. And so I view it as there's actually less risk by knowing what you're doing and be really good at it than not knowing what you're doing and just spreading that around. I think that causes more people grief. And then two, giving it to professional people to spread it around, they're getting paid to move money. So your returns are getting demolished, right? And it's preservation of capital. Even at that, you're spreading it around how many blue chip stocks. So the diversification isn't even diversified because the stock market is in general affected all in unison. So when the stock market goes down 50% and you were diversified, right? It's diversification within the same asset class. So I like diversification.
But what about bonds, AJ? You got to diversify into stocks and bonds.
Oh, the good old 70-30 rule. That's worked out so well. Yeah, not a huge believer in that.
You're 40, aren't you? So it would be 60-40.
60-40, that's right. I've got a few months left, by the way, Kyle. Give me, come on, I'm 39. I've got a few months.
He's 39 3/4, as my kids would say. So along with the whole diversification thing, he actually took it a step further, and he wasn't a big fan at all of making lots of small successful bets. He wasn't a big believer that you get massively successful by hitting base hits, by getting base hits. He was a big believer that you're going to have very few really big opportunities in your life. And there might be 3 or 4 major opportunities your entire life. There might be 1 or 2 big opportunities per year. And to get massively successful, instead of going after the base hits, you need to go after those big, massive opportunities that come along a lot more rarely. And you have to make a massive bet on those big possibilities. And so for me, it's actually interesting because I feel like I've done just the opposite of that in my life. And I've kind of preached just the opposite of that. I've always kind of been a conservative kind of base hit kind of guy, where it's slow and steady wins the race. And then I look at like Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, and I realize that that's basically what they do. They take these big swings for the fence, but in things that they have a good shot of being successful at, buying these big companies, 1 or 2 per year. But most of these companies end up being ultra successful under them. And obviously they've gone on to become a couple of the wealthiest people on the planet because of it.
Jay, you say that though, but like I feel like that's literally what you did is you made the transition from base hits to home runs, and by moving from flipping in single family to syndications in large commercial products. But you're instead of doing a 1 flip every month or a couple flips every month and just churning them out like those base hits, then you're spending 3 months and working on a large commercial project that's going to have bigger returns.
Yeah, but even within the larger deals, I'm still pretty conservative. I mean, you work with me every day, Kyle. You know that I'm the first person to try and find something wrong with a deal, and always looking for that perfect deal, which I guess is sort of what Munger did. But I would always rather take a deal that didn't have a lot of downside, didn't have a lot of upside, but was kind of a likely win versus that deal that had more risk and had more upside and also potentially more downside. So for me, it's not just the size of the deal, but it's also the amount of risk. And it was unclear to me, like if he was saying more risk is good. Obviously, it's not unclear because he was always very specific about how you should be mitigating risk with knowledge. But yeah, I feel like I could do better there.
I think, I look at asymmetrical bets, and it's always interesting because risk is this word that they get thrown around like it's a uniform, standardized thing, which it's not. And, after 2008-9, we were already in real estate, but we went in even bigger because asymmetric bet, we're like, okay, what happens here? It all just goes away, like everything ends. But if it doesn't, it's huge, right? The upside is ginormous. And when we looked at that, the idea of risk didn't make sense to us. The risky stuff was in 2007, but that's not how people view risk. And so I think I really learned through that cycle is that people's perception of actual risk is almost always wrong because it is driven more on feelings in the current moment. So I think people like Jay, you can actually analyze things, right? But I think for the vast majority of investors, lots of times they're being driven more on the emotion, and the emotion they're feeling is predicated on the outcomes of risk that had already taken place. And that leads them to not to over exaggerate downside and to massively undervalue upside. And we see this right now. Like like investors don't want to invest today. And that's exactly why it's a better opportunity than it was 2 years ago. And it's an emotional fear that is being driven off of everything that you're hearing. So asymmetrical bets in investing is a must. And Charlie and Warren Buffett were the kings of this. They bought undervalued product that they said, it's going to go back, right? It's going to turn back to a normal. It's overdone. So I can buy it here. The odds of it going lower are whatever that may be. It's fairly low because it's already tanked. And so you're dealing with the odds of it going away completely or returning to normal. That's a great asymmetrical bet when you're dealing with companies like Coca-Cola. Okay, is it going to go away completely? Because the stock market is pricing it as if it is, as if this thing is done. And then when you look at the fundamentals and analyze the company, you're like, it's not done. So then that means the upside is vastly greater than the possible potential of it going away, which is outrageously low.
And it's funny, you mentioned Coca-Cola. Charlie would say that was one of his biggest failures in his career, even though it was a massive success. But here's the reason I love doing this podcast with you, AJ. It's like you read my mind. I have my notes here, and like the third bullet on my notes was asymmetrical bets. And we
know AJ didn't read the notes, so it was just.
So it's literally a shared doc that I wrote just a few minutes ago, and I can see the fact that AJ is not in the doc, so I know he hasn't read the notes.
I barely made it to the Zoom.
And what's even better is then he even your next point is the know yourself more than knowing the investment, and AJ was talking about that too.
Yeah, and so Munger was a huge fan of asymmetric information, asymmetric bets, and basically he even has a quote of we like to look for we don't leap 7-foot fences. Instead, we look for 1-foot fences with big rewards on the other side. We make the world easy for ourselves that way, not by solving hard problems. Which I love. I mean, too many of us, like, we get in our own way because we think we're geniuses and we think we can do like the things nobody else in the world can do. Basically, their attitude is we do the stuff anybody can do. We just do it really well.
Well, and the one I always like to go back to with them is they always had the 3 buckets for investing. It was the yes bucket, the no bucket, or too difficult bucket. Yep. So that meant it was, it could be a good deal, but I don't know enough about it. And recently Munger was in the news because he was basically saying that AI is too difficult. He doesn't know if it's going to, if he's going to take off. He was very skeptical of it. But that's his whole point. You stick with what you know and what's going to get you those returns, and don't mess with the stuff that you don't know about.
He hated crypto for that reason.
Which is funny because crypto is pretty asymmetrical at the beginning.
It was at the beginning, but Munger was also a huge fan of basically like not falling prey to fads. So for him, it wasn't about the company. It was about the business.
Fundamentals.
Yeah, it was the fundamentals, and it wasn't a brand, and it wasn't an idea. It was like literally, it was the execution.
What are you talking about? The fundamentals of Bitcoin are awesome.
And then I'll bring in one more because I really like this one, and I think this is another one that I think a lot of us fall prey to. But Munger's talked a lot about the sunk cost fallacy, which is basically this idea of a lot of us fall in love with something we're doing, or we do something and we put so much time and energy, even money potentially, into something that once we realize that it's not working out, we don't like to abandon it. It's like we'll use the phrase "throw good money after bad." It's kind of like I put so much time and effort into this that I don't want to give up, even though I know it's not going anywhere. Because like then I have to admit I wasted all that time. When in reality, cut bait as soon as you can, because it's better to waste 20 years of your life than to waste 25 years of your life.
This is something that I think the vast majority of people struggle with on both sides. Meaning they don't, when they cut bait, it's almost always so you got to ask yourself, am I cutting bait because I'm either giving up, so to speak, or it's not working out for me, or I haven't found a solution? Or are you cutting bait because the outcome really is diminished, meaning that the outcome and the possibility of it taking place really won't actually happen, or it's not going to happen to the magnitude. And I don't know about you guys, but that's something that I see so many, especially people in the bottom, or not in the bottom, but starting out, because if you haven't done it before, you don't know what that looks like. So if you haven't done the thing, you don't know what the life cycle of that investment or something looks like. So at the beginning, you can't tell if it's going to, or if I just going after something that'll never accomplish, and then you cut. But with experience comes, I can see along the way, are the outlooks actually changing, or am I running on a treadmill that's going nowhere? But this is a really tough one, I think.
This is something we had to get super comfortable with once we made the jump up to commercial real estate, because in the beginning, like it's tough because you spend so much money and time doing due diligence and finding those properties and doing that when you get one on the hook, it's such a hard thing to let go. And as you move further and further along the process, then you get more and more comfortable with it, to the point where, well, Jay, we just did it today, where we had a property that we had done DD. We'd sunk 50 grand into getting inspections and things like that done. And some things came back at inspection that we weren't happy with. And, there were some shifts in the market and things happened. And we were just like, hey, this isn't the same deal that we looked at 3 months ago. And to your point, we cut bait. So we're, and that's just something we're get more and more comfortable with it, but it's still not a comfortable feeling.
I did that last year on a portfolio. $400,000 is what I lost. And the idea of we could still do this deal, and we could put investors in it, but it was so clear at the time to us that we weren't going to get what we want. So we took a personal $400,000 loss for that.
That's the funny thing. Once you have investors, it actually makes it so much easier to do that, because when it's in your own money, you're more willing to say, hey, like, maybe I could make this work, maybe I could do this, maybe I'd do that. But all of a sudden, when you have investors' money in there, then that ratio just like flips so easily that you could just say, hey, we got to get out.
And to make sure it's clear, I'm not saying I lost $400,000 in investors' money. I didn't cut $400,000. It was my personal capital. We didn't ever put the investors in.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times the issue is that we don't like to deal with pain. We'd rather bury our head in the sand. And it's easier to say, okay, I'm going to push the pain down the road, even though I know that by pushing it down the road, there's going to be more pain. But it's easier to deal with incremental pain for the next several years than it is to have to admit that that we failed and have to accept all that pain right away. And so, yeah. So I'll bring up one more, and Munger never really, I don't know, well, he might have put these things together, but I'm going to put two ideas that he really loved together that I think in a way that I'm sure he would agree works. One, he was a huge fan of the principle of compound interest, and he always kind of referred to compound interest the way supposedly Einstein did, which was the eighth wonder of the world, and how little gains compounded over long periods of time can become huge gains. I'm going to combine that with his other belief that literally the most important thing in the world was learning and continuous learning and going to bed every night a little bit smarter or wiser, as he said, than the day before. And when you put those two things together, it really draws a picture of what success is. And it really is, it's compounding your success based on continuous learning. You learn a little bit today and you learn a little bit tomorrow, and that compounds, and that learning grows and grows and grows and ultimately results in success in all aspects of your life. And so I was a big fan. The exact quote he said was, I constantly see people rise in life who are not the smartest, sometimes not even the most diligent, but they're learning machines. They go to bed every night a little bit wiser than they were when they got up. And boy, does that help, particularly when you have a long run ahead of you. And so it's just a good testament to Munger's belief that his success didn't necessarily come from him being the smartest person or other people being the smartest people, but being willing to learn and continue to learn throughout their entire lives.
I love that.
Yep. So go read a book on behalf of Charlie Munger.
Yeah, or read his book. He has a book. It's called what's it called?
Road Less Stupid.
No. His book was based on the Farmer's Almanac. It was the Charlie Almanac or something. I'll look it up. I'll let you know.
Well, in the meantime, why don't we do a toast? Charlie Munger. Everyone, have a drink. Cheers.
Charlie.
Poor Charlie's Almanac. There you go. Go read it. And here's a fun little fact. The word toast derives from ancient Rome.
We're really doing this?
When people used to, when they would toast, they would actually take a piece of toast and dip it in their wine or drop it in their wine. Kyle loves that fact.
I just told you how dumb a fact that was before, and you decided to bring it up anyway.
He got it in. He's like, I'm going to stick this in the podcast.
Knock it in there.
The bourbon's kicking in already.
Let's get Nussy on the hook here. So there's been a lot of focus over the last year about how unaffordable housing has been, and one topic that's been spun off of that conversation is this concept of middle housing. A few years back, the term middle housing, or the missing middle housing, became popular because it referred to the lack of housing being built that is in between your traditional single-family homes and your larger scale apartments. So whenever we have a guest on the pod, we like to get a perspective on real estate that we don't traditionally have with our mixture of guys. So Mike, why don't you help us define what middle housing is and why we should be paying attention to it?
Man, my mind's racing right now because you talk about sunken cost fallacy, which just blows up this entire business model that we'll talk about today. So yeah, missing middle housing is exactly that. Is we have a housing style that does not match, or a zoning code that does not match our income structures. And so missing middle doesn't refer to anything except middle income. And that's where it comes from. And if you think about the zoning code is relatively a new phenomenon. So our zoning code in Portland was developed in 1979. But if you look back to the turn of the 1900s, the 1940s, we threw density inside of one lot. So a 5,000 square foot lot, or even in Portland, we'll have a 3,000 square foot lot where you have 4 or 5 units on that one lot. But in 1979, we created the zoning code that said each lot has one home. So we created single family zoning. And what comes out of that is now you have single family zoning in a urban core where you're not maximizing density. You're making land values significantly more expensive. You're making housing significantly more expensive. And then you start getting in this world of the haves and the have-nots. And so that's where the thought process came from, is how do we develop real estate in a way that real estate was developed back in previous generations and previous centuries. And so the way to do that is then to allow different types of housing units or styles inside of a single family zone. And so Portland's kind of been a leader in this type of concept across the nation. So we were the first to really establish ADUs and push ADUs into the environment. And so in 2013, and this is how controversial this is. So in 2013, Portland started working on, they called it the 2035 comprehensive plan. Thought process is you need to have 20 years worth of planning. And so they gave themselves a 2-year time period to create this new comprehensive plan. And part of that was including different types of housing styles. So instead of just a single family home, we went from a single family home to an ADU. We started doing that in the early 2000s. But how do you now get duplexes with ADUs, or how do you get triplexes, fourplexes, or cottage style units? And cottage can be 6 units or 8 units in a single family zone. So for example, right now we're doing 6 and 8 unit cottage products in lots that typically would have one home. And so what you do now is you bring a unit style or a unit mix, you bring pricing for new construction to a neighborhood that you never see in a price standpoint. So for example, we're bringing townhome units or detached ADUs or cottages to a marketplace where they sell for $500,000 to $550,000, where in that neighborhood, if you can find new construction under $800,000, you're lucky. And it's not because what's different is it's a different type of unit. So instead of building a single family home with 3 or 4 bedrooms and 2.5 baths and a 1-car garage and a big backyard, which based on land value, if you're paying $300,000 for land, it has to be a $900,000 or $1 million home. Now on that single family lot that you pay $300,000 for, you bring 4 units that are $500,000 each to the marketplace. And so by changing the unit mix, you can now bring you can bring inventory to different income levels inside of a urban marketplace. And that's the thought process behind it.
And I think it's so you talked about Portland, but California has kind of made major inroads in this area in the last couple of years. So I think it was back around 2021, and maybe I don't know all the laws here, but I think it was like back in 2021, California basically said if you own a single family lot, zoning can't stop you from building an ADU on your lot and essentially renting it out or bringing in a family member or a tenant on that ADU. So it basically said you don't need to get zoning permission. You don't need to get special permission on a single family residential lot to build an ADU. And then in 2023, just this year, I think they passed another law, or I know they were talking about another law where they can't stop people from selling that ADU like a condo. And in which case we now have essentially at least 2 units on every single family residential lot, potentially. And this is California, which obviously has a major housing problem. And so this was a good thing for California. But you kind of wonder if this is going to kind of take root in other states, especially states that have high cost of housing and density issues or lack of density issues and other issues with affordable housing.
Well, some version of it is happening in almost any state, and here's my issue with it, and I guess it depends on who are you trying to help here. I always see it kind of going in hand where people think this is going to help solve the affordability crisis, and I get that in concept. What Mike's saying is basically if you have 4 houses in this place that should have been 1, you could bring down the cost of what those houses are, and you could sell them for less, and you'd make it more affordable for people. In practicality, we've seen it happen in our area where they've passed laws to reduce the zoning so that people can put up 4 units in the space that there was 1. And what happens is it only happens in the rich areas. You go to the rich areas and all of a sudden there was a space close to a nice town that now you see a row of 4 townhouses in a space that used to be a single family place, and they're all going for $1 million, $1.25 million. You don't see that practically happening where those starter homes that you have to drive a half hour outside the city that are going for 300,000. You don't see all of a sudden those $300,000 condos showing up in these spaces that they didn't show up before. So I guess if you adhere to the trickle down theory, where basically, okay, those people that are buying those $1 million condos, they're no longer moving outside the city a little bit farther and stealing housing from the people in those, towns that are adjacent. And then that'll just keep trickling down and make it, just if you give more stock in general, it'll help the entire housing market. I guess if you adhere to that, but practically in our area, the changes in zoning haven't really helped those on the lower end.
Well, I think it's not enough. I mean, when we talk about housing, it is very much a simple supply and demand. You increase supply after a certain amount, all prices will drop. We saw that right in 2008. There was just too many houses. But I think what you're talking about here, Kyle, is right. And I look at LA and I don't know. I guess $1 million is a starter house in LA, but I don't know how much that's really going to help. And I agree with that. I think that it's going to allow more housing and more ability, which is desperately needed. But I don't think that you will see is not going to affordability is what I'm saying is I don't think we'll all of a sudden get better because when you're talking in sheer numbers, it's not going to be able to make a dent. They really need to clear the path for more houses to be developed in more like major developments. They need to get not some houses, mass amounts of houses on the market for people to live in. And they need starter homes. They need it to be easy, quick to get this stuff going. And it seems like that's just seized.
Well, I think that's part of the problem is that starter homes don't make sense anymore. I mean, from a purely economic standpoint, to build a starter house, and this goes back to basic economics, which is if I'm going to build 1,000 square foot house or a 5,000 square foot house, it doesn't cost 5 times as much to build a 5,000 square foot house, because those two houses have the same number of kitchens. They have pretty close to the same number of bathrooms. They need the same infrastructure. Most of that extra space in the 5,000 square foot house is empty space. Empty space is really cheap to build. It's paint and carpet. And so basically building bigger isn't necessarily building smaller isn't necessarily going to create more affordable housing, because you can't build smaller for a linearly smaller price
unless you increase density.
unless you increase density.
Where I say this happening is actually stacking incentives. So there's, the government keeps trying to put out these incentives to fix the affordable housing, and none of them work on their own, I guess is the thing. You could talk about LIHTC, you could talk about like all these different, affordable housing, the green energy thing, all these different green energy acts. And the problem is, if you just take them on their own, they're very difficult. They're very difficult to make work because they haven't thought it all the way through. And when I was researching this topic, I actually noticed that there's quite a few opportunities in places where people are stacking these incentives. So they're stacking, something like an affordable housing tax credit with the change in zoning so that they can make it work that way. Or an interesting one I saw was a net zero project where there's all these incentives for building net zero houses, but it's almost impossible to build like a net zero house of like a 3,000 square foot house. Like it's just too big, the envelope, and the logistics don't work. But if you bring that envelope down to 1,200 square feet, then that starts to work. And then if you could stack those incentives on top of, okay, now we can build either these row homes or these, stacked houses, and get them to be net zero, then you can all of a sudden make use of a couple incentives at the same time, and then we're getting somewhere as far as making a dent in affordable housing. So as much as like this one thing won't help, I think if we do enough incentives and we keep pushing stuff out like this, then it will eventually make a dent in it.
Yeah, and I think density is a bit different discussion than what Mike was talking about with middle housing. Middle housing is more not changing the zoning rules around density, but just allowing more density within the existing zoning laws. But even here in Sarasota, where there's a major housing affordability issue, the city essentially said base density in Sarasota City was 50 units per acre. And a year or two ago, they basically came out and said, we need units so bad, affordable units so bad, we're willing to go up to 400 units per acre as long as 15% of them are affordable housing for the next 30 years. And so basically they 8 times, originally they went from 50 to 100, now 100 to 400, but they've gone from 50 units per acre to 400 units per acre, just to incentivize developers to build 15% of them as affordable housing units.
Can you put 60 units in a basement, or
you build up, and so it's going to be driving a lot of skyscrapers.
No, that's what I was saying is, if you have all these affordable tenants and then you have the normal tenants, you want to keep them separated, so you put the affordable ones
put them underground. Yeah.
So what do you guys think about every single generation's gone by, like we talk about affordability crises and things, which it really is, but when you look at home ownership is like super high, especially compared to past generations. So I always find it funny when millennials are like, oh, we're never going to be able to buy a home. It's not like our parents' time. And you're like, yeah, it's not, because your house is just twice as much, and more of you own houses than your parents did. So as a percentage, you actually have more access and better homes. But there's all of these things that the government did to actually incentivize home ownership. It was a big thing, right? And a lot of it had to do on the financing side. I've often wondered, why don't they do things on the back end? Now, nobody wants to help developers out, but what if they did things on the back end to help developers on the financial part to finance the development of more homes? Meaning that, because a lot of it for developments, it's a cash flow problem. Like you're saying, Jay, I got to put so many units out. The margin's bigger here, so I actually have less risk because I have less units out, and I have bigger margin with the smaller amount of units. So instead of having to sell 10, I can sell 6. So I have more odds of being able to sell the 6, and I'm making the same amount of money, and I'm doing a lot of this on credit. So developers are so scared after 2008 because so many of them went under. They do not want to put out houses. One of the largest developers in our state for homes, I was talking to him. He said during 2008, they had 350 houses out that were not sold. That they were, so going into that, they had 350. This was 2 years ago, and I asked him, how many houses do you have out? And he said, I have one, but I'm going to have to check because that may have already gone under contract since this meeting. And so he's like, we will not put out extra houses because the banks, first of all, won't lend credit to it, right? And we won't take on that risk because they don't want to go bankrupt. So, I often think the front end, the government will make incentives by saying, I'm going to force you to put a certain amount of houses. I'll let you do this if you do that. But they're really scared of going bankrupt, and the banks and the financials. Like, I wonder if there was a way they could create an investment, not only product, but the government create better rules for housing and borrowing to do housing than traditionally is had. Incentivize the money to go there.
I think I love that, but I think you go a step further. You don't just incentivize it; you provide it. I mean, the Treasury, the Federal Reserve, they put out debt. They put out Treasury bonds at these days, what, 4, 5, 6%. So why wouldn't the government come to people like you, AJ, or us, and say, hey, instead of bringing in investors at 20% or 22%, we're willing to finance, we're willing to bring all the equity for your deals at 5 or 6%, the same thing that we're charging on our debt. And all you have to do in return is make some of those units available for low income, or donate some of those units back to the government for affordable housing. But basically,
they kind of do that though with the loans though, right? Like you have FHA loans that you provide for affordable housing and for certain structures. You have Fannie and Freddie, which are, they're not government entities, but they're basically government sponsored entities. They do have these structures to do that. And then they do have the tax credit options where that's kind of how they work, where they don't give you the money, but they give you these tax credits, that these tax credits can be bought by banks and all these other people. That the banks are technically the people giving you the money, but the government's giving you the tax credits. So they never really give you the money directly, but they're in essence giving it to you.
But they cap your upside. That's the problem with it. It's like, we want to allow you to do this, but every single product you looked at it, they look at it and they go, once again, it doesn't make financial sense to do that. I'm going to go build the other ones, right? So the problem is they say, we're going to give you this benefit, but we're not going to let you make very much money. And so then developers are like, then why would I do it? And so nobody wants to do affordable housing.
Well, I feel like that's just a blowback protection, right? Like they don't want to come out and be like, hey, we gave AJ $10 million in tax credits to build his affordable housing over here, and AJ went and made $40 million. They just don't want the blowback from that, I guess, is probably why.
I agree, but then nobody's going to do it.
So to ground all these ideas into one concept, because you're all 100% correct. It's affordability, it's production, right? Production and inventory, and it's density. And the problem is when you get into these cities, so Portland's a leader, Minnesota's the other, California is an absolutely terrible example because they just killed the business model by not allowing you to sell them because you don't have economies of scale. So you don't have economies of scale to build rentals. So that's California. But when it comes to all of this, affordability, that is a human trait. Economics, every market is affordable. When you look from an economic standpoint, unaffordability is not an actual thing, right? Every market is affordable because sales actually happen. So it just,
somebody bought
real
them.
estate trickles, somebody bought them. So it trickles down through income. And so, for example, like Kyle, you're talking about incentives. The incentive on our side right now is we have an affordability incentive. So because the market's shifted and because prices have come down, we've had to redo a lot of our projects, and now we're applying for an incentive. And so the incentive that we're applying for is we're looking for no SDC fees, and we're talking $30,000 per unit on the units we're building. Some of them are up to $50,000 per unit. We can save if we go for an affordability incentive. And the affordability incentive is based on, in our market, it's on 100% of the AMI. And the reason it's on 100% of the AMI is because you have to have 125% of the AMI in order to buy a home in Portland, right? And so things trickle down in this scenario. And the only way that now you can provide an incentive, so someone who's making 100% of the area median income can afford a new construction home, is if you add density, scale down on what you're actually going to build to provide something for them to buy. And in a Portland in a market like Portland, we have an urban growth boundary. We don't have the land. So I agree with AJ. Providing production housing and mass duplicating that and creating significant amount of inventory for the average first-time home buyer is literally impossible in our marketplace. And so then the only way that you can do that is to modify zoning regulations. So now you can bring smaller unit size to the market, so that way you can, and then income incentives, so SDC waivers. So now builders have the confidence to build this unit type to then help the marketplace. And then even going on to the builder confidence, which is what AJ was getting to in the builder confidence, you don't need to provide financing for builders. You need to provide financing for the end buyer. The Fed could create a new credit facility right now and say, for new construction product, we are going to offer a loan 5% interest rate. And if they had a credit facility right now that said, hey, all of you lenders out there, you can go underwrite loans at 5% for new construction. We'll buy all those loans from you. You now have a made up manufactured secondary market solely for new construction homes. You'll get builders building. And then that cures kind of the problem we're into. Because my biggest concern about right now, the recession we're in, we've been in a recession for 18 months. It's not about the recession because we haven't had a crash. Our housing industry is A-okay in the 1 to 4 unit world. The problem is affordability 10 years from now because builders aren't building right now. And so you can achieve that by giving them confidence that they can sell their product. And that's where I think the powers that be, the Fed, can actually create something to help our marketplace.
Or how about a 40-year loan? I feel like that's right on the cusp of happening right now too, where you already saw that with the workout.
Yeah, the problem with 40, it's just not as surgical, right? So if you create a 40-year loan, now all real estate everywhere goes up in value. But if you do a specific credit facility just for new construction loans, now you're surgically going into the marketplace and you're saying, we're incentivizing builders to build because they know they have an end product to sell to.
Yeah, but the incentive doesn't just have to be the interest rate. It could be any number of things, right? And I guess that's what I was saying is, hey, if you offer the 40-year loan on one of these properties, then you don't have to subsidize the interest rates down. You're just spreading it out, and it could, I've always said that actually one of Donald Trump's best ideas was creating longer dated treasuries, where that would have helped out. But to me, 40-year loans are going to happen anyway. So why not, use it right now as a targeted thing that's going to help a small segment that's going to help the entire market.
So can I ask a question? Because there's also something else. Is it too, though, it's just entirely possible that 66% of the United States shouldn't own homes? So we have home ownership that just blows any other country out of the water. And we have home ownership in the last 20 years that is way higher than it's ever been. And historically is astronomically higher in the United States than it's ever been.
I would argue that, though, too, because Jay brought this up, I don't know if it was a few days ago, about the amount of people living with their parents. And if you look at the way that home ownership rate is calculated, it's just the estimated total population in owner occupied units divided by the total population. And so, like, I don't know exactly, but I'm thinking when Jay brings up that how many people are living with their parents, like, are they considered, part of the home ownership rate? Because the way I'm reading this, from the St. Louis Fred, how they're calculating it.
Yeah, but you want to know why it is? Because they're not renters. So what you're doing is you're taking who has to pay rent versus who doesn't and who's paying to. So there's two people going to that one mortgage, but that mortgage is still owned. So it's either a rent. You see what I'm saying? So, like, if you said there's not two people, then where's the renter?
But when we say, okay, home ownership rate, we see the home ownership rate. Oh, we still have home ownership rate over 60%. Like, that's, do we? Like, if we all of a sudden all those people that were before, those 25-year-olds that were renting, they were bringing that home ownership rate down. Now they're staying with their parents. like, isn't that bringing the home ownership rate up artificially? And so now we're in a time where the home ownership rate is artificially high than what it actually is historically.
Yeah, to illustrate that, imagine I owned a house and I had 300 million Americans living with me, every American living with me in my house. In theory, now we have 100% home ownership rate in the US, even though I'm literally the only one in the US that owns a
Good
house.
for you, Scott. Good for you, man.
You just call me Scott.
Yeah, I did.
and he's the only one not drinking.
I know, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think that's a really good point, and I think part of it, and to that point, is part of it is that we've romanticized this idea of owning a home, and a lot of people that
American dream.
yeah, the American dream, and a lot of people talk very authoritatively that if you don't own a home, you're making a bad financial decision. And the reality is, yeah, I could argue that there are times where owning a home is a really good idea for certain people in certain situations. But to say blanket statement that owning a home is always better than renting just makes no sense to me, especially
But
today.
Jay, when you own your home, you're paying yourself.
You're paying yourself, but you're paying yourself a whole lot more because, I mean, we talked about this a few weeks ago on the show where literally the disparity between owning and renting today is higher than any time in the last 40 or 50 years. It's 52% more to own a home these days. It costs 52% more to own a home these days than to rent. And so, again, I'm not saying there aren't advantages to owning a home, but from a purely financial standpoint, I'm not convinced that saying owning a home is always better.
So on a macro, I agree with that on a micro level. Like you have to make individual micro decisions, but on a macro level, I don't know that people realize how much the 1970s really fucked everything. So we got off the gold standard. We created mortgage-backed securities. What is the average outside of owning a home? Where's the average person, average American going to build wealth? And so when you're no longer on the gold standard, the easiest asset to obtain is a home. You already have that expense inside of your your personal budget. You create mortgages based on the secondary market that now makes it feasible for you to actually own a home. And
It's pretty easy to buy Bitcoin these days. I don't know.
well, that's the exact thing. So sure, okay, so Bitcoin's gone up 100% in the past year. It's doubled in value. So if you have $1,000 to invest, you made $1,000 in the past year on a historic increase, right? Well, not historic for Bitcoin, but like 100% in 1 year, that's significant. But how many Americans have $100,000 to invest? So that way they make 100,000. Most Americans have 500 or 800 or 1,000. And so what can they invest in that literally changes their future? They really don't have an option outside of housing. And so the modern mortgage market, which really was created in the 1990s, demolished in the 2000s, and then recreated in 2012 and beyond, that's their option. And so it makes sense that homeownership increases.
But is it a good option if you don't assume that the price of housing is going to continue to go up? Like we saw it in the 90s, where basically we saw stagnant house pricing. So is that a good investment if the people always say, oh, real estate's always going to go up? There's some famous people who we won't meet or we won't mention right now.
It doesn't need to go up. That's the beauty of it, because you get to pay your mortgage down. So you got to pay your mortgage down instead of paying someone else.
We talked about this last time, though, that as long as what you're paying to rent is not like significantly lower than what you're paying to buy. So right now we're just out of whack where your cost of living in a similar home as to one you could rent. If you just take the interest portion of your mortgage payments, right now the interest portion of your mortgage payments is higher than what you would be paying to rent a similar home. So is that really a good investment, I guess is the point Jay was making.
Yeah, and this is a moment in time, and I think that fluctuates. And I think on average, it is the best. Well, I think it's undisputed. It is the greatest wealth creation for Americans that we even have, right? The amount of people that are retiring from it, the amount of people doing it. But I think there is also, though, an argument to say is the goal to make everybody have a home? I mean, we saw what happened when Clinton decided to do that, got all the banks in a room and said, you get everybody a home. Well, they came out with mortgage-backed securities, and then they just leveraged the snot out of the system to try to move people into homes. So I think there is a level where we're like, well, everyone shouldn't have a home, right?
I agree with that.
Fair enough. All right, we're getting a little long in the tooth, so we got to move on here. And we have an important segment coming up. This is a reoccurring segment of AJ Academy, where AJ is so busy all week that it's difficult to figure out what he's going to talk about. And then today, AJ was sitting down with the former commissioner of the IRS, and a bunch of good insights came out of that. So AJ, why don't you enlighten us as well as our audience about some of the takeaways that you got from that?
Yeah, so I've been at a conference down here, and it was just really interesting to hear them talk about the really the debt, America's debt, what they think is going on, kind of from the horse's mouth, so to speak, right? And I think I thought it was going to go a lot of different ways. It was, but it didn't quite go the way that I thought it would, where he was concerned or not. At first, I thought there would be a big concern on America's the debt that we currently have, which at the end of the day, he was not concerned about the debt at all. Now he's concerned about liabilities, meaning that in his words, the debt is meaningless. We can pay it off, right? But the future liabilities of the United States are not. We can't pay them off. He's like, we can't. There's no way. We're not ever going to be able to do it.
And by liabilities, you mean like Social Security? Like,
yes, unfunded liabilities that the United States has agreed to pay. And so the debt that we have, as though it's climbing, right, pales in comparison to the unfunded liabilities that the United States has taken on. And that, he's like, our debt, we can handle, we can pay off. The unfunded liabilities, there's no way. We'll never be able to pay. And it was really interesting hearing the guy that's supposed to be getting the money to pay the debt. And that was literally his job, was as commissioner of the IRS. That it was to say, can you just tax? Well, can we tax more? And it's like, no, you just can't even do it. And that brought up a whole conversation then with, and I talked to him afterwards about this, but he was talking to some of the people in the room, and they were asking him, well, all right, we're in this position. What is driving this? What do we do? And him, as well as some very large names, but they had a very strong, almost like an emotional reaction. They were worried, but they thought that the American maybe culture, society as a whole, that's what they were worried about. As in, they said, we have so many people in America that are so mad, even though it has never been better. So there's never been a moment in history where we have it better, and particularly than Americans do today. They work less, they make more, they have higher disposable income. Now, yes, over the last 5 years, the inflation, price of goods, surged. But I mean, overall, this has been a trend that's been going on for a long time, where they become more and more dissatisfied with their position, even though income equality over the last 10 years has gone down. So Americans have actually gotten better. Labor markets are tighter. The American worker today, they were talking about and showed, is better off than they've ever been. They're better off than they were 4 years ago, the American worker. And so they were very nervous about this, because as they sat up there, they go, we've never seen Americans so dissatisfied. While when you ask them, what are you dissatisfied about, right? It's kind of a wishy-washy array of a lot of things, and it's a general state of being. Whereas they don't have problems. We don't have anything, all the problems that we've had in American society, going back from 30 years ago plus, right, have been basically eradicated. Social injustices, on and on. Across the board for Americans, we're so much better off. But yet we are more unhappy than we were in the 60s, in the 40s, before World Wars, after World Wars, on every survey that they can even find. And when they looked at it, the idea was, they go, we now have no perspective anymore in America. And they were very concerned by this, meaning that they think that something bad has to happen so Americans can regain perspective and understanding. They say we've been so disconnected and had it good for so long that we don't even almost like realize it. And they were very concerned that something either bad had to happen or we were going to tear it down. So they're like, we're going to tear down this whole thing because we think that it is way worse in reality than it actually is. Not at all where I thought the conversation was going to go. That is not at all what I thought we were going to talk about. And that's not at all, I guess, I thought what he, particularly this person, knowing everything from his political affiliation, things like that, what he would say. And I sat in the room and I was just kind of looking around as people were talking. I got him afterwards and I asked him and two other people on the panel. They talked about it for an hour straight. They talked about all these different events. They talked about what the government is, where they're like, we have the largest lack of leadership that we've ever seen on all ends. They said it's really, really bad right now. And I afterwards, when I was talking with them and we were sitting down, I asked, I was like, I understand this feeling. Do you think this is a problem or whatnot? And he says, it's the one thing that keeps him up at night, because that results in everything from our actions to liabilities we're taking on. And he's like, where it's headed, he said, I was in a position where I had to look at the revenue coming in, what we were getting, where we were going to get it from, and the future then. And he's like, I'm looking out 50, 60 years in the future. And he's like, I don't know how we get there. I don't even know how we do it. And right now, people aren't happy with it being so good. What's going to happen here when production goes down, taxes go up? We actually have to start paying things here 20 years down the road. And we have to do things like cut Medicare, cut Social Security, right? You start having France moments where it's not payable. We can't do it. So where do we got to start to cut? And just seeing it in his face and everything, it was, I don't know. It was not what I thought I was going to learn about or talk about, but very interesting.
So did he have any light at the end of the tunnel, or did he just bring up all these issues and then say we're fucked and walked off the stage?
No, literally they said, we believe something bad's going to happen. So they said Americans will have to regain perspective. And they said that they believe that could be a combination of things like non-government assisted recessions or depressions. They think that we've been artificially held, as they stated, meaning that we have taken out the bad in the economy, and that has resulted in everything from unfunded liabilities to massive debt, everything else, where the pain has just been eradicated. And so long, we no longer even have really an association with it, and we don't believe that there should be any of it. And he said, at some point, we will not be able to do that anymore. We will not be able to gloss over, and that bad will have to go down to Main Street. And he said that's when he believes that it'll flip.
And I mean, I was talking about this last week and about the fact that we have a lot of investors around that who have, before 2008, we used to see recessions every 4 or 5 years. And so it was a good reawakening for investors every 4 or 5 years, that you're not geniuses. We're not all perfect, and we make mistakes, and it forces us to learn and go through these cycles. And we talked about that last week. And I think this is actually a really good metaphor or analogy to how the general public thinks as well. Exactly what you're saying, that if you have things too good for too long, people stop learning how to be self-reliant. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to struggle. There's a lot of benefits to hardship. It builds self-confidence. It builds self-confidence. It builds your ability to problem solve, because you have to problem solve. It reaffirms your desire for hard work and the need for hard work, and all of these other things. Gratitude, all these things that come along with the struggle. And if we go 10 or 12 or now 15 years without these struggles for a lot of people, I'm not saying nobody struggle, a lot of people in this country struggle, but for the most part, we haven't seen a recession in 15 years. And so all these people haven't had to struggle, and they're becoming, and I hate to use this phrase because it's overused, but they're becoming weak of spirit. Because
yes, that's exactly what they said, by the way.
Yeah. And so I think restoring the natural order of the economy would go a long way towards getting things back to normal. Having a recession every few years.
So, but what do we do with this information though?
Well, I think it's that we need to, first of all, understand, because the big part is millennials, meaning that the vast majority of millennials did not go through 2008. So what Jay's talking about here is you have the largest generation ever, the largest generation in America's history that is out, and they are now taking over the workforce, the political spectrum, and everything else, and they have not ever gone through a recession. Think about that. That is wild to think about. That we have the largest generation that is now taking over management, the power. They're replacing baby boomers at an astronomical rate, and they have never gone through an actual contraction that really hit mainstream. They saw their parents go through it, but they did not. They weren't the ones that lost their jobs, their houses. They went bankrupt, right? And that is, I think, a major part of this. And I think it's important for us and others to remember how not only good we have it, but it won't always last. And we need to be resilient, and we need to take advantage of the good, save for the bad. And I think it's something that if we haven't gone through it, I think you just got to realize it.
So I always struggle with information like this because it's one of those, like, it's the same thing with us saying we know a recession's coming. Well, we don't know when, and how do we act right now? And it's like you see all these real estate investors where I brought it up with Jay the other day. It sounds like the same investors who said, hey, like, I'm going to wait for the crash for me to invest. Well, they were, if they said that 8 years ago, they're still waiting. And like, we know that there's issues in the government. There's nothing that we can do about these unfunded liabilities. And we know it's going to be a problem, but the government has been very resilient at kicking the can down the road. We know that if anything, they are perpetual can kickers, and they are very good at that. And so like this could blow up like outside of our lifetime for all we know. And so what do we do with the information that, yes, he's going to propose all these things that we have issues with, but like, what do we do with that information?
We're the people that has to solve the problems, though. And that's the thing that he was saying. He's a baby boomer. It's now us. We have to solve the problems, and we're going to face the consequences of them.
How do we solve any of these problems?
No, we don't. There's two ways the government solves this problem. One, they tax your retirement accounts, and they extend the age before you can start getting Social Security benefits. That's the only cure the government has. And so from an individual standpoint,
I disagree.
Okay.
We are the government. Who's listening to this podcast that becomes a congressman or a senator? Who listens to this podcast that ends up having a company that has 10,000 employees?
No one. We have a very intelligent listener base, and none of them are going to want to go into politics.
That's true. They're not going to become politics. That's very true. So, but you see what I'm saying? Like like our generation is the ones that's going to come up, and we have to do something about it. So like the decisions that are being made in these people, I don't know, I hope at least, but to just say there's nothing anybody can do about it, so we shouldn't even talk about it, that to me is lunacy. Like,
no, I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about it. I'm saying, like, what can we do?
Well, no, you make yourself independent.
I agree with that.
But I think we're giving up too easily here. I mean, we're the smartest nation on the planet. We've got some of the smartest people on the planet.
Debatable.
And to say that the only way to solve this issue is to tax retirement or to cut subsidies, that's just like that's giving up. And we need to be creative, and we need to completely revamp these programs. We need to completely revamp the way we do things. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and we could have an entire argument for the next 5 hours over healthcare and single payer versus the current system and all of that. But the reality is, nobody here can argue that the healthcare system in this country is efficient. Figure out how to make the healthcare system in this country efficient. And again, I don't care if we're talking about single payer or any other plan. Figure out how to make healthcare more efficient. And now suddenly Medicaid, Medicare become a whole lot cheaper. And then figure out how to make just in general housing more affordable, and figure out how to make commodities more affordable, even if you increase the price of luxuries. And now suddenly Social Security goes further. Figure out how to, like, say, AJ, you're going to get probably a huge social security benefit when you turn of age. Kyle, Mike, me, we're all going to get huge social security benefits when we turn of age. Do we need that? I'm guessing none of the four of us are going to need our social security
Wait,
benefits.
Jay, you pay taxes?
I used to have a W-2.
So Jay, I thought you were going to go with this, because this is always what you say, is that AI is going to solve all these problems. The productivity gains that we're going to get from AI are going to all of a sudden just that's how we're going to produce our way out of these all of these issues.
We're going to see massive deflation thanks to productivity increases, which is going to lead to a whole bunch of other problems. But the world is going to be different. And I really think that we can solve these problems if we put our minds to it and we don't let the idiot politicians who just want to kick the can down the road and who want to put Band-Aids on things. We need politicians in office. We need people in office who are heavy thinkers.
And if we don't hold them accountable, who the heck is? That's literally our job.
But it's easy for us to say we need these politicians, but what can we really do? Like, what am I going to do? Write a letter to my senator? Like, that's what they always say, like, write a letter to your senator. Like, what am I really going to do? I got 2 kids. I'm not going to tell my kids, hey, look, you should pay attention to politics because we need good politicians in our lives. And I'm not going to say, hey, don't become an entrepreneur like mommy and daddy. You should go into politics because the US government needs better politicians. No, like, what can we do?
There's a difference between being a politician and holding them accountable. And I think one of the problems we actually have in the United States is we're not holding people freaking accountable. And I think this idea that there isn't.
How? We get 2 options to vote for.
Okay, first of all,
you got 2 options. I get to vote for Trump or Biden. How am I making an issue?
presidents are irrelevant. If you change the local politicians, the senators and the congressmen, which you actually have effect on, you can actually go meet, you can talk to these people, you can talk to your neighbors. This is a much smaller thing. You fix that and it goes up to the top. Presidents are figureheads.
But there's always usually 2, sometimes 3 locals, and most of the time it's a runaway. Like it's one person that is getting 90% of the votes because they've been there for a long time. People like them, whatever. Like no actual change comes out of this. I think to say that, hey, we're going to be able to. What's that?
You think that there's nothing you can do, so we shouldn't even say anything, and we shouldn't do anything because there's nothing any of us can do.
I'm not saying there's nothing we could do. I'm saying trying to get politicians to make the changes for us is a lost cause. I'm saying we make the changes that we need to see in private enterprises, in private companies, in private business, and we shape what the country should be ourselves as entrepreneurs. That's what
100. Okay, I agree with that 100%. Right there, because politicians got to go. I completely agree.
Real quick, Jay gave the correct answer. The correct answer is a structural change from a leadership standpoint. AJ is looking for a functional answer, right? And so, and here's where I'm looking at AJ. Like, as an individual, what do I have more faith in? Do I have more faith that the government's going to figure out their entitlement programs? Or do I have faith that the government's just going to say, we're just going to find a way to tax you more? So here's how we're going to do it. You know, all that retirement accounts we've been jumping money into, we're going to find a way to tax that. And when it comes to entitlements, anyone under 40, I'm sorry, you now get your entitlements 5 years later. Those are the easy solutions, and we can't bank on politicians to be easy. So we can't bank on politicians to provide the actual framework and process to get to the correct answer. So we have to bank on the functional answer. So me as an individual, I don't max out my retirement accounts. Why? Because I believe at one point they're going to get taxed. What's the other thing? I don't bank on getting Social Security, which means I have to be independent from the system. And so from a functional standpoint, you make it to the point where no one owns you. That's the only way to be completely independent. Some people will do that, some won't, but you can't bank on the government to provide the correct answer, in my opinion.
I agree 100%. And I think as someone that invests people capital, that's our whole thing. Long-term investments, we want other people participating. We want to grow capital, make people independently wealthy, right? That we can do it. We're all trying to accomplish that and do that. And the more that spreads out and the more ability that we have to do that. And like Jay even said, just solutions. It's shocking to me how much basic solutions have so much impact. But we're all on the same page. Nobody expects politicians to do crap because the only thing they'll do is mess it up. But for us to provide basic fundamental solutions, that is widespread and available.
Fair enough. Well, we're not going to solve all the government's problems in one segment, so we're probably going to have to hit that again. But let's wrap this up with a top 10. And since we started with Charlie Munger, we'll end with Charlie Munger. And Jay touched on how people like to attribute Charlie Munger only with Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett, but he was actually a pretty proficient investor beforehand. And one of the things that Warren Buffett even pointed out as he partnered with Charlie Munger was his returns prior to him partnering with him. So I thought instead of a top 10, we'll do a top 14, and we'll do the 14 years that Charlie Munger ran his Munger partnership. He should have called it a Mungership. That would have made it better. But the Munger partnership, the returns that he achieved before joining with Berkshire Hathaway. So it starts in 1962 and goes to 1975. And I'm going to rattle these off with his returns versus the S&P 500. So 62, he got a 30% return versus a negative 8.8 in the S&P. 63, he had a 71% return versus a 22% in the S&P. 64, in 1964, he had a 49% return versus 16% return in the S&P. 65, 88.4. I'll just go down his. 66, he had a 12.4. 67, he had a 56.2. 68, he had a 40.4% return. 69, he had a 28.3. Now we get into some tough times. In 1970, he had just a 0.1% negative return. 71, he had a 25% return. 72, he had an 8.3% return. And then 73, he had a negative 31%, 74 a negative 31, but then he made up for it in 75 with 73% return. So if you average all of those years, he had a total return of 1,156%, which is 19.8% average annual return. So he was a pretty good investor prior to meeting with or joining Berkshire Hathaway. So I thought I'd just point that out. All right. So one quick drinking game before I let you guys get out of here. And we talked about Charlie Munger, how he made it to 99 years old, which I would be very happy if I made it anywhere close to 99 years old, which got me thinking, would you want to know, if you could, when you would die, how you would die, or would you rather not know? AJ, what are you saying?
Not know.
Not know?
Yeah, I couldn't handle it.
Takes the fun out of life. I mean, you never know.
I would dwell on it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think if you knew when you were going to die, like you could restructure your life and it would be pretty awesome. Like,
No, as long as I don't know, I can pretend like it's never going to happen.
like I could start smoking cigarettes too, like, because it's not going to matter, when you're going to die. I never smoked cigarettes, but maybe I would pick it up and, maybe I would do some more dangerous stuff. Or if they're like, hey, like we need somebody to save this baby on this cliff, you only have a 5% chance of living. Well, I'll go save the baby because I know I'm going to make it. It's
Unless you die by falling off a cliff.
Yeah, I think there might be a lot of third order consequences with that really messes with you. And all of a sudden,
Exactly.
you may not do things that you should be doing. So,
Well, I'm assuming that the one theory of time travel that everything's already happened, and you're already
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you do, you can't affect it. But yes, I don't know. I think I'd want to know when I die. I wouldn't want to know how I die because that would mess with you the rest of your life. You'd always be looking out for that. Like if you found out you died in a car accident, how much would that screw with your life? So I don't think I'd want to know that, but I think it'd be good to be able to plan your life up to the minute. It'd be a good little exercise. But I guess I'm the only one.
Well, we didn't get Mike's answer.
Mike was nodding along with you guys, so I assumed he had the same one.
I like to be unknown.
blissfully unaware.
Ignorance is bliss, right?
That's right.
Yep.
Mhm.
That's why I'm so happy.
Let's wrap this off. Let's start with Mike. You were nice enough to join us. You got anything you want to plug before you go?
Oh, like me personally? Is that what you mean? Is that this part of the segment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got back on social media for the first time in 2 years, so I'm really excited about this. So unfortunately, I don't know what I'm doing on social media, so it's Facebook, and it's just my name, Mike Nuss. That's where you can find me.
What happened to Rarebird?
There is rarebird_Mike on Instagram. I haven't figured out how to do videos, so maybe in a month from now, there might be some videos.
Yeah, I love the rare bird. You're suiting to your name because rare bird posts rarely, but whenever you post, I always check it out. So anyway, go look up Mike Nuss and everything he's doing, and check him out on Instagram and the different socials. But he's a super smart guy. He's got a lot of insight. I'm sure you could tell from this podcast. All right, I'll go with Jay last because he never has something. So think about something, Jay. And AJ, what do you got?
Newsletter. We're been working on our newsletters. It's coming out, so you guys can go check that out. Get it. It comes out weekly. Lots of good stuff.
Awesome, Jay. Enough time for you?
Yeah, so we still have our fund. It's almost fully subscribed for this round, but we still got a little bit of room left. So anybody that's looking for tax benefits before the end of the year, some cash flow, some profit share in a lower risk alternative investment, hit me up. We'd love to talk to you about our fund.
Yeah, maybe I'll have to look into that and I'll see. Maybe I'll throw some money in there. As always, I'm going to plug my wife. Check her out. Her handle's Badash Investor on all the socials, mainly Instagram. Puts a lot of time in Instagram, so go make her feel good and give her a follow. Once again, Mike, thanks for joining us, buddy. We had a lot of fun.
Thank you. My favorite podcast by far. This was a memorable moment. Thank you.
Did you get your Blantons done? Are you all finished up?
It's empty. We're good.
Perfect. Well, I don't know about you guys. I also have an empty drink and have time to hit the head. So thanks again to Mike. And for the rest of you, I will see you next Tuesday.
See you guys.
So, yeah.
Adios, everybody.